Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is our new segment on Romantic Manifesto, where we are going to do a deep dive. This is all about posing your questions and answering the questions and having a kind of deep discussion on it. Great thanks to Jonathan for kind of initiating this by first coming up with all kinds of questions during the regular presentations and then asking for it on Meetup, and then connecting up, thanks to Joya and Ash to kind of step in and start talking about the questions. So now we want to take it to the next stage. Jonathan will be sharing the Google Doc with us, and you can add your own questions. Put your name right next to the questions. And then what we will do is that we'll use these questions to dive into the book, even at a greater depth than we are doing already. So this is the pilot episode of this. So it's being led by Jonathan, Joya, and Ash. All right, so Jonathan, can you go ahead and read out, how many questions do you have so far? Approximately.
That's about 8. What is that? 3.
Okay.
Oh, there's quite a few. There's some sub questions. So
Okay,
let's just go with 12.
Okay, and the thing is that I'm a big fan of questions, okay? Because questions are far more important than answers, because questions prime your mind to actually go ahead and answer the question. So let's go ahead and just read out all the questions. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Sure. So if art is nutrition for the soul, then how should we select the kind of art we're consuming, and how should we approach consuming it? And there are sub questions for that. And she uses fuel, but I just use nutrition because I was thinking, well, if it has so much value, you can think of it like a nutrition or a diet as well. And then do moods or current struggles have some relevance? Like, should we select based on how we're feeling, on the struggles we're going through now, or is there some other way to select? Can we maximize the nutritional value of art by using specific methods to view it, to listen to it, or to read it? For example, maybe that means when you finish reading the book, you write a small summary, you write some thoughts, you write about why it made you feel a certain way. Maybe you relate it to principles you hold or ideas you hold. And then what are some ideas and methods for just different thoughts on ideas and methods for selecting what art to view or read or listen to, or like how you find good art? So should I keep going, Shrikant?
Yeah, just keep going.
Yeah.
Let's read through all the questions. So people,
sure.
let me give another introduction here. So folks, the aim here is to kind of pull together the questions. So today, this pilot episode, we are going to do only for 30 minutes. We're going to stop at 5:30. Okay. But what we're going to do is that this is kind of to encourage people to go ahead and engage at a deeper level. So Jonathan has put the link in the chat, so you can go ahead and go there and you can add your own questions. If you want, you can go ahead and reach out to Jonathan. He will give you access or whatever he needs to do in order to make that possible. And then you can add your questions and then we can discuss them here. So let's go ahead. And this is an example of the kinds of questions that Jonathan has come up with, but you can come up with your own questions. So go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, so the next one was, what else beyond, one of the key values in art that I understood was the emotional fuel that it provides us, but what else beyond that can or does art offer us? And then, so the next question is about the classics. So Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Homer. Usually when we're approaching them, we're told we need to work to understand them, which makes sense. But then how do we know that? Are we just going by what other people are saying, that it's good and therefore it'll be good for us? Or is there some other way for us to determine whether we should put in the work to study some classical text, whether Dante or whatever it is? And then this was brought up. This was a question that was brought up today in the discussion about, have any of us experienced this kind of resentment or resistance to analyzing some piece of art that we've just loved? And the next question is about sense of life, which is one of the earlier essays. Like, why does there need to be some overall theme or unity in a sense of life when we can hold many different conflicting ideas that we only act on at different times in different contexts? And And then also just a discussion on, this is not a question, but it's a discussion on clarifying further differences between sense of life, personality, and temperament. And then how to, maybe clues or ideas on how to distinguish between those within ourselves. So in terms of identifying our own sense of life and putting it in words. And then this is, again, not a question, but just maybe finding snippets of text from fiction or from something else that really resonate with us in some way powerfully, and then identifying if it does reflect a certain sense of life. So I didn't put it here, but there was a quote by Jack London, which I really like, which I feel like captures something quite significant in the way I see things. So it's just that, process of analyzing just anything that we really resonate with.
Excellent. Jonathan, can you do me a favor? Can you cut and paste these questions into the chat so it is easier for people to access, and then stop sharing the screen?
Yes, sure. I just don't know, because there's the, I'll paste it now. I just don't know, because of the points, the formatting might come out
That's fine.
strangely.
Don't worry about the formatting. All right. So Ash and Joya, you have actually talked about some of the questions, right? Okay. So I'm going to throw it to Ash first. So Ash, would you like to pick up on any of these questions and talk about them? And folks, if you have read the book, you're welcome to go ahead and type an exclamation mark. And this is a discussion on these questions. So Ash, which question would you like to pick first to talk about?
So, I mean, we can just go ahead and start at the top, I guess, and kind of work our way down, or unless anybody else kind of wants to jump around.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Well,
So
if
what
we're
we're
going to
doing,
pick,
just one thing. So so we are going to deal with the first block of questions. Okay. Now Ash is going to talk about it, and then Joya and Jonathan can talk about it. But if you have anything else, anybody else has anything to say on that question, go ahead and type an exclamation mark, and we'll come to you. We'll incorporate it. This is a discussion. Okay. So Ash, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the sub questions that he has there about, how should we select the kind of art we're consuming and how should we approach consuming it? He says, do moods or current struggles have some relevance? And I think the answer is definitely yes, they have some relevance. I don't know if they would always be, or should be your primary means of deciding what to read at a given time, or, but, like if you've got a reading list with 12 different books on it and one of them seems particularly relevant to a current struggle you're going through, or just, just seems intriguing to you, like, I think that's totally relevant to deciding what kind of art to pursue. And that kind of does relate to your later question where, you said when you're talking about reading the classics, how do we know if these books will actually provide us with the nutrition that we need? And I guess one thing I would want to say about that is just there's no duty to consume any kind of art or particular work of art. So it doesn't matter how great a classic it is supposed to be. Like, you don't have to read Homer if that just doesn't interest you, right? And, at some point later in your life, because, like back to the other question, your current mood or struggles can come in later, and that you may find that more relevant at a different period of your life. But, you definitely don't want to just be reading something out of a sense of duty, because that is not going to be a way to find the kind of emotional fuel or nutritional value that you're looking for. And I don't know if Joya wants to jump in there, because she was actually the one that kind of pointed out that, Ayn Rand actually uses this term fuel rather than nutrition. And I think that is kind of an interesting choice that Jonathan made in the question to use the term nutrition instead. So did you have any other thoughts on that?
Excellent. So it's going to be Joya, Judith, and Rupali. Joya, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear if Jonathan has more to say about this metaphor of nutrition. I think it's intriguing. There was one little piece of this that I wanted to pull out and answer. One of the sub questions here was, how should we approach consuming it? And so I just wanted to share one of the most valuable things that I took out of all of the years that I spent as an English major and a graduate student. One of the most valuable tools that I learned was the skill of close reading. And what close reading is, kind of exactly what it sounds like, where you really focus, you go very, very minutely into the word choices. And you ask the questions, as Rob was bringing up, an author goes through this process of, there could be 7 different possible words, and they're going to try to hone in on just the right one. And there could be a really interesting question of how the author goes about doing that. Sherry suggested that, once you have your sense of life, that you can almost go subconsciously, and the right word, it just feels right. And so that's what you go. And then maybe there's this shuttling back and forth between the intuitive and the analytical as you're editing and thinking about what are the exact words that are going to make it to the final draft. But when you're the reader approaching the work of art, there's a way that you can just zoom in on the specific words that are used and ask, what effect is there that the author used these words, and what is the effect of that? So one example we started talking about was the very beginning of The Fountainhead, which starts with the phrase, Howard Rourke laughed, and what that tells us about the character. And what we're getting into in that very first paragraph, what we learn even about that laughter, that the laughter is simultaneously a dismissal, because Howard Rourke has just been expelled from school. And what that tells us about the character, that his reaction to being expelled is to just laugh it off. And that this laugh is also simultaneously a laughter about the deep joy of living and existence. And what we see of Howard Rourke in that first paragraph is that he's naked, alone in nature, and he's looking out at the trees and the rocks and thinking about how he can take these elements from nature and use them to create new buildings that look like no buildings that have ever existed before on Earth. And so just even doing that deep dive into the specific word choices that the author uses, and asking ourselves how it would be different if the author used different words. We sort of see an example of that even in the Romantic Manifesto, when she kind of gives us the rewritten scene of the Fountainhead, and to think deeply about what effect it is that this specific word choice has, and how it would be different if the words were different.
Yeah, can I just add to that a little bit too? Because one thing that Joy had said when we were discussing that earlier is, and I think this points to a good method to use when reading, to both to analyze the literary style or other qualities, but also for your own appreciation, is to ask yourself this question of like as against what, like contrasted to what. And so Howard Rourke's reaction to being expelled of laughing as against Joy had mentioned, like, well, some people might like be very bitter and angry about it, or there could be a whole range of reactions. So, but that it was this particular reaction tells you something about the character, and that's interesting.
Excellent. So next up, Jonathan, do you want to say anything about this difference you see between nutrition and fuel? And then we will go to Judith and Rupali.
Sure. It's more of a personal example, but basically I used to see food as just fuel. Whatever you eat, it's fine. It's just there to sustain you and make sure you keep moving through the day. Whereas once you get to thinking in terms of nutrition, then you're not just eating anything. You're really thinking about, what am I putting into my body? How does it make me feel? How much energy do I have that day? How much better am I for it? You're putting much more thought into it. So that's why I put it there. It's a personal distinction.
Okay, excellent. Next up is going to be Judith, followed by Rupali. Judith?
Well, I like that distinction of nutrition. I also come from a background in nutrition. Another thing you could add to that idea probably is that, we need, which is what I was going to talk about, is that we need a broad, I think it's good to select your literature by picking broadly and widely across styles and cultures, and where the authors are from, and that's like the different nutrients we need in our diet. We need a variety. I think it enriches your life a lot if you have exposure. So I tend to I think each of us tend to gravitate towards certain types of things maybe, and we have our reading list, but I find a lot of times when I look outside to people who aren't just like me and see, what are you reading? What's interesting? And share that with others and then talk about it, like in book clubs, is really deepen my appreciation for many different types of reading that I might not otherwise.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Rupali.
Hi. So Jonathan, that was a fantastic distinction between food and nutrition and just whatever we consume and fuel. the thing that comes to, so I teach elementary and middle school children, and one of the poems that we were reading is The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. And that poem is quite at a higher level, but these were third grade students who were reading the poem. And the part that I want to talk about is this. From the rust within their throats is a groan, and the people are the people that they dwell up in the steeple all alone, and who, tolling, 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 in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart a stone. And we talked about life and we talked about the human life cycle. They've learned that in biology and they see it in life cycles of animals. But what literature and art does, it connects those dots at a much higher level that children can relate to themselves. Now, it so happens that our school is in a church. And one day, in the middle of the day, the bells were ringing. And the children just stopped. And one of the boys said, "For whom the bells toll." And we all got it. Every single child understood the meaning. So when you talk about moods and emotions, something that came up earlier was, why do we revisit a piece of art? Because these are human interactions or human experiences that are brought together in very precise, concise manner. And so I think that when you probably read, the mood, it may not match with what you're doing, but when you are in the mood, it'll come back to you. I think for another great poem is Invictus, that Nelson Mandela repeated to himself every single day. And there's power in these great literary works. And Shrikant, is it okay to talk about another question about Shakespeare and the
Sure,
class?
go ahead.
So another story from my students. So we are doing Shakespeare with middle school children in India. And for them, it's a new language. They didn't even know about Shakespeare about 10 days ago. And we introduced them to a small scene in Midsummer Night's Dream. And it was very difficult for the children to even understand the meanings of the words. And the very first thing one student said was, "I don't even understand it." And so we started with No Fear Shakespeare. And we read that text to them and went, word by word. And as they understood the context, they were able to enact the scenes in that emotion. And it was just a matter of, few minutes that switch happened. And so we gave the students a choice. We said, would you like to read No Fear Shakespeare because it's easier? Or do you want to read the original text? And without missing a heartbeat, they all said the original text. And I was so surprised. I said, why would you choose such a difficult text? And one of the girls said, because of the structure and order the text provides to me. It is so melodious. So even really without going into the details of analyzing that whole text with these children, there is that inherent quality in the classics that makes it last for generations, for years. And one of the books we are reading with our very young children, first to third graders, is Gilgamesh the Hero. Again, it's such an old story. It's one of the first stories written about a hero. And at the end of the reading, the teacher asked the students, so what did you learn from this? And a first grader said, well, he had a lot of difficulties and he had to get through a lot of challenges, and so will we. And so, children can make those connections. And the earlier you expose them to good literature, you can see those effects in middle school and high school, that these children have a purpose, that they're driven by something they want to do, and they're not kind of getting lost in those adolescent years. Those are my quick points, Shrikant. Thank you.
Amazing. We did a meetup on fairy tales from the Jungian perspective. And this lady who has spent like 20 years studying fairy tales was actually demonstrating the same point, that actually these stories capture something very deep, and children get it. They get it like that. I think there is a famous Einstein's quote. I think one of the mothers of one of the boys went to Einstein, I want my boy to be a great scientist. And the boy was like 4 or 5 or something like that. What should I do? So Einstein says, read him fairy tales. So she said, she was very skeptical. She says, okay, I'll do that. But then what do I do? Read him more fairy tales. Uh, so it's a very deep thing. Next up is Heather. Heather, go ahead. Heather, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry, I just got it. I'm just kind of struck by the importance of this question about how to be selective about what we consume, because we are living among the first generations in human history for whom this is a critical question. Our problem is not the availability of art, but having to edit out the constant bombardment of demands for our attention. So I'm not claiming to know the answer, but I do think it's probably something we should be asking ourselves all the time. And one thought that occurred to me, maybe I'm just responding to a question with a question, but there's a quote that's become kind of a mantra in this creative group that I belong to, and that is create before you consume. And that's intended as advice for creative professionals, but maybe there's a little bit more universal application in that before we look, certainly when you wake up in the morning, before you pick up your phone and get online and subject your brain to all the algorithms that are vying for your attention, maybe it's more important to get settled into whatever it is that you do, whether you journal or your work is meaningful to you or you have hobbies, to do that first and get settled into your sense of self and your true priorities, and let that direct your curiosity about the kinds of artwork you want to consume, maybe.
Heather, that was fantastic. I think it's absolutely true. I'm a big fan of that, of being kind of not, being in participatory sports instead of spectator sports. The way I see it is that I read in order to write. So writing is the primary thing. You doing art is the primary thing. You consume art in order to do, make that happen. So, anybody else has any observations about that, the importance of creating art versus Judith?
Yeah, it was really interesting to watch my daughter get into writing, creative writing on her own. So she was exposed to all kinds of literature as a child because I did. And then she had no access really to anything fun to do. So she had this tiny laptop, and I said, well, why don't you write? So she could write. So right from an early age, I mean, she could write really well. But she would write these beautifully descriptive passages, but she had no plot there. It wasn't really a story, but there were these moments that she could just describe with so much texture. So then she herself decided, and she would come and tell me, she's like 15, 16 years old maybe, that she was going to figure out how she could do, she wanted to do character development. But she didn't have characters in her head to do, so she borrowed characters. So she did like fan fiction. She took characters from a book and then gave them things to resolve. And she worked on that craft for a while. And then she said, but they don't talk right. Their voices aren't right. Mm-hmm. So then once she had mastered the character development, sort of like things that they do, or the plot, I don't know what you call it. I remember then she tackled dialogue. And it was just so incredible to see, because she would send me these and she'd ask for my critiques, and I'd give her, like, well, this didn't sound good. That just honest critiques, what's good, what's bad. And she'd go back, but I would just watch this evolution of her progress. It was so cool to see, this creative process. So I guess it's something we could all do,
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith. So folks, this was a test of this format, and it's obviously works very well. So Jonathan, what I was thinking, I put a link in Reddit. Could you also copy? Well, let's do it in parallel. So anybody who wants to put stuff in Google Doc can put it in Google Doc. They can put it publicly on Reddit if they want. And I'm going to hand over the kind of ownership of that to you. There is a Reddit link, so you can go ahead and just go to the Reddit and put the questions there. And immediately after the meetup ends on Saturday, we will do this session. Does that make sense, Jonathan?
Yeah, sure. So you want me to, I'll paste the questions into
paste questions in the Reddit.
Sounds good.
The Reddit.
Okay,
So,
no worries.
and if somebody, and I would prefer to use Reddit because it is public more, and people even outside this community will come to see it, and we'll get more, more interaction. And what I will do is that I will go ahead and post it on the Ayn Rand Reddit as well. So we'll get people who are really into Romantic Manifesto coming and contributing to this discussion. Okay, so that allows, so that creates a more public forum, and we'll get more people in on this. And I thought it worked very well. So Jonathan, how do you think it worked?
Yeah, great. I think it's the more people we get who are interested, and the more questions we have, the better we learn more. So
Right.
I'll put the questions in Reddit. Sounds
And
like
see,
a good idea.
I think it always in terms of schedule. So doing this immediately after the meetup, so people who have already come here, schedule time to do that, can just stay and continue with it. Ash, what do you think?
I thought it was great. I got a lot out of even just this brief discussion. I thought Rupali's examples were fantastic. And I love, after the discussion, even more the kind of distinction between fuel and nutrition. Because, I know I stressed at the beginning that you don't have a duty to consume art that doesn't interest you. But I also liked Judith's point that, there is a value to consuming works of art, like a greater variety from a variety of times and cultures, even things that you might not at first think you can relate to. So now I kind of think of it in terms of, like, instead of, all art is just kind of calories, it's more like, oh, I need some vitamin R or some Russian literature, some, Victorian literature, something like that. So yeah, I thought everybody's contributions were fantastic, and I really loved this discussion.
Absolutely, Ash, and I also am using nutrition instead of fuel is also growing on me, especially relating to Heather's point. So Heather's point was that don't eat junk food. Don't consume junk food. Don't start your day with just taking all kinds of empty calories and poison in combination. To
Nothing wrong with junk food occasionally, but it's more of the problem of, like she said, there's so much quantity now that the problem now is finding the quality stuff, filtering and always looking for higher and higher quality.
Right. Just like the diet, we are living in the age of abundance. Yep. And our genes are, just like our physical nature is focused on trying to grab all the calories we can, because we would need it for day when there would be starvation. Our attention is also like that, and that's what all these media uses. It's like, hey, here is the shiny stuff, here is the shiny stuff. And when you do that, you're wasting your attention, and you're basically consuming things which are actually poisonous. Joya, what did you think?
Yeah, and I want to say I'm loving this nutrition analogy too. And Joe was actually the first person who brought this up too. He mentioned that trying to pick a favorite book was like trying to pick a favorite food. And it strikes me we can maybe push this analogy even more, because we know that, for example, food serves the community purpose. So I think it was Judith who was pointing this out, that sometimes the value of reading a book is reading it with other people. So the same way that sometimes the value of a meal is sharing it with other people, or this idea that, it's fascinating to explore cuisines from all different cultures, because we see how different cultures tackle the same problem of how do we put ingredients together, and it's maybe a similar thing. So I'm wondering if we can push this analogy and say, what are the macronutrients in art or in literature, the big things that we have to pull out and make sure we get on an ongoing basis. That would be interesting. But yeah, I love this format of doing the deep dive here, and I can't wait to go into more of the questions.
Wonderful. Les, just very brief comment. Go ahead, Les.
Sure. Personally, I prefer the spiritual fuel as opposed to nutrition. I think the nutrition I take it as more like the body, affecting the body, the nutrients, as opposed to the mind, the spiritual, the subconscious. If you look at Ayn Rand further, she talks about, there's two choices every time you make a choice. One of them is to focus. And the focus, the parallel she draws from that is like to turn that pilot light on within you. Okay. And after you do that, so you get that kind of ignition. So the spiritual fuel, the lighting, the pilot light, it's the fuel. Okay. You can even think of your gasoline fuel in order to get combustion. That's the starting point, right? You need that fuel. So so that's the rational part coming out in her, like the focus part, combined with the emotional side here on the spiritual fuel. I think you get that integration in between the mind and the body by keeping it just as spiritual fuel. It encompasses a broader context than limiting it to just nutrients and nutrition.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Les.
Right.
Sherry, you had something.
Yeah, I absolutely love this idea. Jonathan, thank you. And Ash and Joya for pulling this together. This is the sort of thing that is just really, really exciting for us. One thing, and we're going to try to see if we can schedule this in. One thing I think would be really great is to have an example each time. So if somebody has a work of fiction like this Jack London quote, this piece that you want to talk about, if something can be put in there ahead of time, maybe it's a work of art that somebody wants to discuss. That way people can look at it and start getting their thoughts gathered. That might be a great way, because honestly, the best way, I think, to get a better understanding of what sorts of art is good for you at this moment in your life is to understand, to evaluate it, more pieces over and over again. It'll send you in the right directions that way. So I think that's a really great way. If you can put those examples up that we can all discuss, would be a great thing to do.
Wonderful, folks. Again, I've put the link to Reddit in the chat. You can go ahead and post anything on the Reddit. You can either, just respond to that particular thread, or feel free to start new threads if you want. If you wanted to start a thread about nutrition and macronutrients and everything of art, you can go ahead and do that. It's a Reddit, so you can just start threads, as you want. All right, folks, this is so amazing, and I really love it. It's like, I like the fact that Jonathan came up with questions. He took the initiative. Joya and Ash jumped on it, and we were able to kind of do a meetup out of that right away and set up meetup for the future. So it allows for much more deeper examination of it. So thank you very much. So, thank you so much, everybody. It's amazing to see all these great people here. And this is exactly what human beings are supposed to do. So thank you very much.